Howdy once again everyone, and while doing some general research for my review of the new Fuji X100VI camera, I came across this, an admittedly good looking $35 knockoff from AliExpress, although you'd have to be a few cans short of a six-pack to actually think you're buying a Fuji camera here. It claims to be a 48 megapixel camera with 4K video, image stabilization and a bunch of other features including facial recognition, autofocus and a micro four thirds sensor, and it was only £25 for me plus delivery. It's marketed under a number of names such as Oyodec, Fambrow and Melcam, each name sounding more like a Doctor Who monster than an electronics company. You can also find this thing on Amazon for about 3 times the price. Do not pay that much though. Just take a punt on AliExpress with this one, and only after you've watched this review and you know what you're letting yourself in for. And check out all the emails I got from AliExpress relating to this order, 14 of them. I hope they have an automated system there and not some poor human being typing all those out. Well, last time I locked horns with a camera like this, I hungered for death within 10 minutes of starting my testing process, which was suffused by the bitter taste of inadequacy and disappointment from start to finish. It claimed to be a 16 megapixel digital SLR camera, but even Hannibal Lecter would have trouble keeping that down, as most of the claims on that device's spec sheet turned out to be utterly mendacious. I'm hoping this newer cheapo camera can actually offer some kind of photographic potential. Although the camera actually looks quite nicely designed, when it comes to build quality it is the king of plastic, sitting on a throne of cheapness, weighing very little. Half of its controls, like the control ring on the lens and the dial around the power button, are simply moulded plastic fixed in place. The top control dial turns very easily and will often find you in the wrong shooting mode as a result. However, the shutter button and the rear buttons do click down quite positively. The camera's screen is not very bright, but it is quite high resolution, which is encouraging to see. The menu system is slow to navigate and dead simple, almost being made for children. Half of its options, such as the white balance control, the ISO control, the beauty face, the JPEG quality and the anti-shake controls, don't actually seem to do anything at all, as well as most of the shooting modes, although the exposure compensation option can make a small difference to your image. The special image effects look pretty cool though, I have to admit. Still, navigating those options is a bit of a slow and laborious process, and the screen itself picks up scratches very easily. The camera's viewfinder is just unmarked and see-through, offering no indication of where your picture frame actually is, but bizarrely, the manufacturer did elect to put an eye sensor next to it to deactivate the camera's screen when the viewfinder is against your face. My own camera came with one battery. It is small sized but lasted a long time, getting around 500 to 600 shots. The camera uses micro SD cards. I formatted a fast speed 128GB one, which worked perfectly fine, as this camera did not come with a memory card. On the side of the body, we get a mini HDMI port, which didn't seem to work for me, unfortunately. There's also a microphone socket, which I didn't get round to bother testing because, well, my motivation to even live was running low at this point, and there's a USB-C port for charging the camera up. On the front of the camera, we get a quote-unquote flash, which is simply a small LED light with very little power. The camera's lens, however, is not so bad. With a maximum aperture of f2.2, it can handle some darker situations and get you very slightly out of focus backgrounds if you're shooting up close. Despite the lens's focal length of 3.37mm, the pictures have a wide angle of about 24mm full frame equivalent, which means the camera is definitely not micro four thirds, although its pictures are in a 4:3 aspect ratio. Unlike the suggestion on the front, this lens does not zoom in at all. Any kind of zooming in the camera is just digital. One nice thing though is that the camera's lens has a 46mm wide filter thread, so you can put polarizing filters or other filters on there if you so please. When it comes to burst shooting, well, the camera does have a high-speed shooting mode, but you could play a round of golf in between pictures. It can capture 1 image per second for about 3 seconds before locking up and needing resetting, and it does not have any kind of mechanical shutter, only electronic. The camera does have autofocus though, which worked accurately enough, taking about a second to focus. Overall, while this camera's design might look okay, in terms of build quality it really is a cheap plastic piece of garbage, with many of its features either sputtering out an inconsequential performance or just not working at all. Well, who really cares about all that? It's image quality that counts, right? This camera claims to offer 48 megapixels of resolution, so let's see it up against my closest equivalent camera, a 45 megapixel Nikon Z7. Well, trying to locate 48 megapixels of detail here is about as futile as spying Amundsen and his huskies speeding towards the South Pole while you're still walking around millets looking for thermal socks. My test chart here is looking about as decimated as a landscape ravaged by a hurricane. This camera is obviously capturing like an 8 or perhaps even just 4 megapixel image and then upscaling it. Well, let's zoom out to about what an 8 megapixel image would look like, and now you can at least see some kind of usable, but still not pretty, picture quality. So the camera can capture a somewhat useful image, so long as you don't zoom into it at all or plan on printing it on anything other than 6x4 inch photo paper. I couldn't check any ISO levels higher than 100 because the ISO control in the menus doesn't actually do anything, as I mentioned earlier, but here is an image taken in somewhat low light, which as you can see looks pretty smudgy as a result. You also cannot control the camera's shutter speed or its aperture. One bit of good news is that the final JPEG images don't seem to have any real distortion or vignetting, as you can see, so at least that is being corrected. Let's see about video quality. Here is the 4K video. As you can see, it's actually capturing some detail here, but it's rather noisy, and even worse, only running at 15 frames per second. I don't think much of the so-called image stabilization either. The 1080p video footage runs at a far smoother 30 frames per second, but is way softer, and there's no option for manual exposure, so the camera is constantly brightening and darkening the image, which looks very disturbing. Overall, well, while this camera is certainly much better than the last cheapo camera I tested out, still my test results were a bit of a wasteland of negativity here, as I expected. Did I mention that at one point, inexplicably, the camera would suddenly only take, quote, 48 megapixel images when it was pointed down at my crotch and not up at my subject? Turning down a resolution in the menu seemed to fix that little problem, not that the camera's images are even approaching 48 megapixels in the first place. The camera offers soft, messy looking images, terrible, shaky video, technical problems, and fake menu options. In the world of online RPGs, this is known as stacking debuffs, and while this camera may not completely reek of degeneracy and decay, its specification sheet is certainly full of lies, unfortunately, so it still has to come highly not recommended. Okay, I'd better go and test some real camera equipment before anyone starts asking what the marijuana budget of this channel is. Oh, and by the way, in case you were wondering, this wasn't the only camera I took to Seville on holiday with me, thank goodness. Well, thanks for watching everyone, and if you find yourself watching my videos often and want to support the channel, then check out my Patreon page in the description, where you can find all kinds of exclusive bonus content. Hasta mañana, todos.